Chapter 36 is Chapter 2 of Part 7, the second day from Sunday evening to Monday evening. The second day of the week found Jesus early on the road, accompanied by his disciples going up to Jerusalem. And this is supposed to be between Bethany and Jerusalem, Monday the 3rd of April, Matthew 21 and Mark 11. The record is that he was hungry. Why the early morn should find him so, when he might have broken fast with his friends in Bethany, is not so very clear. He may have spent the night in devotion, and being joined by his disciples before sunrise, proceeded to the city at once, knowing that his time was short, and it behooved him to do so promptly, all that he would do before the final catastrophe. As they were going towards the city, he saw a solitary fig tree on the roadside at some distance in advance, and was attracted by its display of leafage. He approached it, if haply he might find something on it. Well, he probably would have known since he was little that he would have found fruit that time of year. There was no fruit. There was nothing but leaves. He said to it, "May no one to the end of this age eat fruit of you." We shall see that the next morning the disciples noticed that it was utterly withered. Few passages in the life of Jesus have gone so perplexing to his friends, and such an apparent vantage ground to those who either dislike Jesus or disbelieve his history as this. The destructive critics, such as Dr. Strauss, call it a vindictive miracle. Sort of is. You're not benefiting me, so I'm going to curse you. It's like, This author calls attention to the fact that it is the only one of its kind in that evangelical history. The friends of both the historian and Jesus have felt that it is a passage especially pressed with difficulties. It is a flaw in the crystal, a muddy place in the clear stream, an ugly cloud on the pure sky. And so the commentators have endeavored to explain away what seems to obscure the character of Jesus in this act. But after all attempts, there stands the fact that Jesus cursed a tree and it withered. It was a miracle. Was it vindictive? If Jesus was angry, had he just cause to be angry? He had his passions. There is no more sin in anger than in hunger, in the abstract. But was he at all angry? In the Islamic view, it's not acceptable to curse nature. Animals, plants, whatever. The trouble of the narrative is that it is believed to tell the following story, namely Jesus, one of the characters that we refer to as Jesus via the Bible, saw a fig tree in full leaf. He was hungry and went to it, hoping to be able to gather figs. He was disappointed. He was angered. He cursed the tree. Under that curse, it withered. In that society, how would he not know that the fruit comes in like August or September or something? This is not a pleasant picture of a great and good man. The difficulty is increased by the statement of Mark, for it was not the season of figs. Then the tree could not reasonably have been expected to have figs. It is treated as a free moral agent, being only a vegetable, and is then destroyed for not doing what it could not do. This seems a hard fate for the tree, and an unhandsome conduct in Jesus. To abate the embarrassment, one commentator proposes a change in the reading of the Greek, so that it shall read, it was the season of figs. This has two difficulties. One, there is no codex that justifies this reading, and two, it was not a fact. He was in the rocky regions of Judea, and it was early in April. Well, there's ideas that the Passover was actually changed from a hotter time of year over into March, and kind of like the ancient Egyptian great heat and little heat festivals of August and July, that it was more around those times. And then you might have had figs, right? Josephus tells us that in the neighborhood of the Sea of Galilee, figs grew 10 months in the year. But this was not true of the vicinity of Jerusalem. And the commentator Heinsius Exercit Sac, I don't remember what that stands for, edited 1639, page 116. Equally futile is the suggestion of another to read the passage as a question. For was it not the season of figs? Of course it was not. Moreover, that style does not appear in Mark. While he is a graphic word painter, he has no emotional rhetoric. The same may be said of another suggestion. It was not a good season for figs. Hammond annotated ad esmer. There is no authority for the reading, and it was quite too early in the year to declare whether it was to be a good season or not. Another explanation is that the fig harvest had not yet arrived. That is, Jesus came expecting fruit, because the time in which the figs were gathered had not yet come, so that there could not be the explanation that there had been a good crop, and that it had been gathered. This is more nearly reasonable than the others, but still there is the fact in the natural history of the fig that it does not ordinarily ripen in Palestine until June. Now, it was only called Palestine to insult the locals, because the Israelites didn't conquer Palestine. The Palestine was a term they came up with to insult the locals. Not that there weren't real Satanists, but we are told there is an early kind which has been gathered as far up as Lebanon as early as May. Yet, the general time of ripening is in June. There are other interpretations, but these will suffice as examples. It is to be observed that none of these explanations touch the root of the matter, the destruction of an inanimate object, because it was not in the condition in which it was expected to be found. Friends and foes seem to agree on one point, which Dr. Strauss states thus. Mark adds these words in order to explain what, in the case of a particular tree, may be easily explained, even in fig time, by disease or from local causes, why Jesus found no fruit upon it. It seems to me that Mark did no such thing. It was not the absence of fruit, but the presence of leaves, which Mark sought to explain. It appears that in the case of the fig, the fruit often appears before and generally with the leaves. The early fruit comes before the leaves, which do not appear until the late season. Hackett's Illustration of Scriptures, page 141. Indeed, the appearance of fig leaves is one of the signs of approaching summer, as Jesus said, Matthew 24:32, when its branch puts forth leaves, you shall know the summer is nigh. If the gar in the original be translated although instead of for, it seems to me that great help will be afforded to the proper comprehension of the passage. No man was expecting figs, but as they went towards Jerusalem in these first days of April, they saw a fig tree in foliage, although it was not the season of figs. If leaves, then there should have been fruit, for the fruit comes first. Jesus was not angry, but as was usual with Oriental teachers, when he found occasion to teach a lesson symbolically, he seized the occasion. Well, if he was angry, so what? It's the action that's the issue here. He blinded the tree, not because it did not have fruit, but because being fruitless, it did have leaves. The tree stood a symbol of the Jewish people, leafy and fruitless, in advance of all the nations of the earth, in religious pretensions, while being at the same time quite as destitute of real fruit as the Greeks and Romans and others, whom they regarded as barbarians and pagans. See, people aren't barbarians and pagans of themselves. That's a hate speech by others, because it's not, being civilized or not being civilized, or being monotheist versus polytheist or something like that. In a special manner, that particular set of the Jews, called the Pharisees, leafed out into manifold baptisms and minute tithings and excessive fastings and broadened phylacteries, while the fruits of piety and humanity were nowhere to be found in their lives. The act of Jesus was not vindictive, but didactic. He did no harm to the tree, while he impressed a profound lesson upon his disciples by what may be considered an acted parable and prophecy. But there is still another consideration which seems to me more important than all others. Possessing power to smite and to destroy, and being about to yield himself voluntarily to death, a death from which he might easily extricate himself if he was really a god, by destroying all his enemies, it was important that the world should know that he had this power. Otherwise, the grandeur of his self-sacrifice would be unknown to the race. Now, doesn't it say elsewhere that Jesus didn't do things by his own power, but the power of the one who sent him? He didn't have his own doctrine, but the doctrine of the one who sent him? This is what the Bible says. So, how does this conclusion make sense? There were only two ways in which he could exhibit it: by smiting things animate or things inanimate. It was in purest mercy that he chose the latter. We now know what he could have done when bound and buffeted and insulted and led out to be crucified. He could have made Caiaphas or Pilate or Herod or the Roman centurion the blasted result of the exercise of his power. To know that he had this power and did not exert it on men under the circumstances is the grandest display of mercy possible to man. No, if there were people who deserved it, it was be far more merciful to spare the innocent tree, and to let it be said devoutly and possibly to God, it is worth more than all the trees that ever grew. Plant this stricken tree of Tuesday beside the cross of Friday, and you have a suggestion worth the study of man through all the ages of time and of eternity. We have seen that very early in his ministry, Jesus had entered the temple and rebuked its secularization by driving the profaning money changers from the sacred precincts. It does not seem to have made a permanent cure of the evil. Just like if you look at this so-called dying on the cross stuff, how have things just not gotten worse over the past 1900 something years or 2000 years or whatever year you're going to put on it? The temple market, as it was called, tabernae, where animals for sacrifice and oil and wine and salt and incense were sold to worshippers, and the uncurrent and profaned coin of those who came from distant countries was exchanged, and had been set up again in the court of, let's call them, court of the foreigners, really, the uninitiated maybe. Again Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of the dove sellers, and drove these merchants from the house of God, and forbade the carrying of utensils through the holy house, as if it were a common edifice. It is supposed that operatives and mechanics on their way to work stepped in for worship, bringing their tools with them and setting them down while they prayed, thus making the temple a commonplace. Perhaps also, rather than take a longer way around, those who were engaged about the temple carried utensils through the holy places. It was the general secularization of holy things which Jesus rebuked and endeavored to reform. Well, you can't always leave all your stuff at the door, but, it is to be noticed that the first cleansing of the temple at the beginning of his ministry was performed by Jesus as an act of zeal on his part as a prophet. The Jurnat something at something Gentile, right? 4:6. The supposition is suggested by the act of Phinehas, Numbers 25:11. The learned Selden and others maintain the existence of a zealot rite, which justified one who was moved by a sudden, uncontrollable prophetic impulse to attack existing irregularities in the national worship. Well, variety, bid'ah, as they'd call the Arabic thing, that which is outside, innovations that violate the set of rules and ways and stuff. This is just not part of it, that sort of thing. In some such spirit, Jesus seems to have performed the first cleansing. This second purification appears to be made in character of Messiah. The people were giving him such a recognition. He could not, in such a position, allow this profanation of the temple of God. It is to be noticed that the first purification excelled in violence of act, and the second in severity of word. In both cases there was a majesty and moral force in the very presence of Jesus, which accomplished the cleaning of the courts by the quick disappearance of the merchants. Freely combining and using two passages from the prophetic writings, Isaiah 6, verse 7, and Jeremiah 7, verse 11, he says, "Is it not written that my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you are making it a den of robbers"? Now, in the Islamic vision, there's no secular talk. People can mention the ethics of business or something like that, but they don't, nothing secular is to be talked about. The charge is that the church had become at once narrow and profane. God's religion has the spirit of universality. It is a religion for all the nations. Well, the Bible has Jesus say it's for the lost sheep of Israel, and it would have been for those who witnessed among them, because it's, again, the land. But it's apparent, he says, it's going to take him by the Ishmaelites and then given, it's going to take, take him from the Israelites and give him to the Ishmaelites, and some comforter that's not him, which can translate as Ahmed, either variation that you're looking at for that word in Greek, but there's excluded the nations, and where humanity should have been represented, there was a body of thieves. These fine discriminations are characteristic of Jesus. Discriminations which escaped ordinary observation, but which, when once made by him, summoned the history of the world to their demonstration. In every age we can now see, since Jesus has indicated it, that there is an exceedingly slight difference between a bigot and a thief. He who is unwilling to allow his fellow man the spiritual rights he has in virtue of being a man will not long hesitate to take from him his material properties, and he who will cheat a saint will not long hesitate when he has an opportunity to defraud a sinner. This severity was followed by acts of mercy. Blind and lame people came to him, and he healed them publicly in the temple. The children caught the general enthusiasm, the remembrance of Palm Sunday, jubilations, and the sight of the discomfited merchants, and of the healed patients, whose sight and activity had been restored, kindled an ardor the young, and they sang around the powerful teacher, Hosanna to the Son of David. It gave sore displeasure to the churchmen to see a man who was not in the succession, not of the tribe of Aaron, doing things more wonderful than miracles and receiving these messianic salutations. To the latter they called his attention, pointing to the children and saying, "Do you hear what these say?" His reply was prompt and emphatic, "Yes." Have you never read, "Out of the mouths of babes and sucklings thou hast perfected praise"? Psalm 8, verse 2. They did not believe that he was the Messiah in any sense. The children employed words from the sacred writings, which, whatever sense their tender minds may have seen in them, no man could accept who did not believe himself to be the Messiah in some sense. Jesus did accept them. More and more the malignity of the church deepened against him. The scribes and chief priests sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him because the people were astonished at his teaching. During the day he taught in the temple. When the evening came, he retired to rest in Bethany.